Hello, everyone. Welcome. You are listening and watching simultaneously Rashkin Report and Silicon Curtain. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Jonathan Fink. Jonathan,
What
you
a
are hello, and
Here we are. What a week. What a week. Oh
no,
my, what a week, what a day, what an hour. It's all happening.
it is, and we could talk about Trump's tariffs, but first I have to ask you what is going on because the Russian threat is now to the royal family as well. What's happening with person formerly known as Prince Andrew?
Foreigners Prince. Well, the good news is that despite everything that's going on, it seems the rule of law still stands, at least for now in the United Kingdom. It seems that whether you are a judge or a billionaire or a former prince, you are not above the law. And I find that exceptionally reassuring. Um, my question back to you is, at what point did money bestow a privilege in America on those that then came to think they could behave like sort of, 18th century aristocrats outside the law? At what point did this immunity come about? An essentially exemption from the rule of law. It's an extraordinary and disturbing question.
Well, if we look at how long Epstein's been around, we're talking decades.
Yeah.
But I think it's realistic to say that this is, to a large extent, how the world has always operated. But we are now entering a stage where there's people with some astronomical wealth, and I think that makes them feel like they're immune from certain consequences because this is my experience. A friend of mine from high school, he teaches at a university in the United States, and he's computer science, and he said he's been in meetings with Elon Musk and Bill Gates and others, and he says, they're all a little crazy because they haven't been told no in a long time. And I think that this is kind of the continuation of this bubble that money can place people into, where they feel like they can only surround themselves with people that agree with them, and they seem to be immune from consequences. And then this is not everybody, but some of them have really terrible ideas.
It is, and it's interesting it because it's not that suddenly we're holding Prince Andrew to account now. It's been quite clear that for a long time, the other one who's been caught by this, which is Lord Mandelson, we've known for a long time that he is not quite proper. Which raises the question of why he was appointed back to the government. He's had to resign over and over again through various scandals. There's always been this sort of whiff of corruption and nepotism around him. There's always been some kind of unctuous, sort of sleazy atmosphere around him that hinted at corruption and this feeling of, I'd say impunity and being above the law. Um, but it's interesting at what point that actually becomes so sort of blatant that you have to do something about it. I think we've reached that point. Um,
I have a question for you,
yeah,
Jonathan, because it seems like when we look at the Epstein affair, or the Trump files featuring Jeffrey Epstein, um, are we concerned about crimes against children or crimes against money? Because it seems like the crime against money is far more severely punishable, including in Great Britain, because formerly known as Prince Andrew did not get into trouble for crimes against children, did he?
not yet, not yet. And one wonders whether the crimes against money are the sort of breaking, as it were, of the legal hymen, and then consequences follow on from that. Who knows? But it's been quite clear that over decades, this individual has had a sense of impunity. And I think that sense of impunity starts with feeling that certain conventions, whether they be manners, whether they be the niceties of civilized interaction, don't apply. I've heard from several people who've interacted with the former Prince Andrew and told me that he's an absolute raving a-hole, completely entitled, often angry, screaming at people, just a really kind of unpleasant and entitled individual. That's not a crime until there is substantial evidence. So the question here, I think, is, are those crimes against children? Is there a higher legal bar that needs to pass? Um, is it that that evidence is not more readily available? Or is it that somehow they have to sort of broach this sense of impunity through, financial laws before they can get the other stuff? I mean, as someone said on Twitter or X earlier, it reminds you a little bit of Al Capone. Getting Al Capone for tax evasion is the one that you can get them on, and that's how you sort of you cut through and maybe open the way to other charges. I don't honestly know, but he had clearly a reputation internally and amongst some of the people who knew, and then he was given this role of trade envoy. Now, his predilections must have been known amongst, let's say, staff in the royal household. They must have at least had some intimations of what he was up to, and yet they gave him this role that kind of pandered to what he was all about, which was hobnobbing with rich people and traveling all over the place at the country's expense. Now, whether that's done just to get him out of the way, or whether that's done as a kind of perk, is quite disturbing, or whether he's actually set up for a fall. I find that one less credible. Putting him in a situation where they know he's going to do something to incriminate himself. I find that the less likely scenario. So there's all sorts of questions here. But
What
again,
about such possibility that he will say all sorts of things about other people that he knows?
I mean, he is, one would guess that he is the kind of spineless little worm who would absolutely, squeal on everybody the minute he comes under pressure or to regain any of his former privileges. I'm sure he will. I'm sure he'll dish the dirt. It just seems to me that that's the kind of character he is, completely flawed entirely. As you say, it's another person where people have probably never said no to him in decades. Whereas it's someone who really, should have not just had no, but been given a thorough, dare I say it, a bit of a slap over and over until he changed his behaviour. But no one's ever, I guess, done that. Or if they have, then the consequences haven't stuck in. What is interesting, of course, is that point where you go from rumor, where you go from commonplace insider knowledge of criminality, but people sort of hunkering down out of fear for their jobs or positions, or not being the first one to sort of break cover, or those who've actually submitted their concerns to either the police or their employer authorities and have been either ignored or treated rottenly as whistleblowers. We had another scandal here in the UK around a TV personality who turned out to be one of the world's most serial sort of sexual perverts and child rapists. Ironically, not ironically, unfortunately, he was patron of a children's charity at a famous hospital, and he was the head or the host of a program intended for children. So and when this all came out, it seems that many dozens, if not hundreds, of people had a bit of an inkling of what's going on. Some had direct knowledge of it, and yet it was allowed to proceed for decades. So this is the interesting point. It's not the rule of law is cast iron here, but eventually it seems to kick in. The question is, why does it not kick in when an earlier phase when those crimes are being committed?
I would imagine because of the cost involved to those, and the fear that you're, as one person against going somebody with immense wealth, and that's what allowed somebody like Epstein to get away with his things for years.
And Me
Like
Too
right
had the
now,
same with
part of
the
the
what's his
part,
name?
uh,
That
part
who's the TV the movie producer that kicked off the Me Too movement. You also had this,
oh, Harvey
fear of being
Weinstein.
a whistle. Harvey Weinstein, yeah. I mean, people are blacklisted from the industry for speaking out, and I think we've had similar kind of things here.
Right now, we're actually part of the latest Epstein fallout of the last day or two is more how much he was connected with different universities. because from his point of view, clearly that's like a hunting ground. But from the university's point of view, well, this is a wealthy donor. And so there's all these situations where he was surrounded with young people that university basically sent his way because he paid $50,000 donation.
It's grim, isn't it? It's a certain connivance as well in that either it's naivety or it's a kind of knowing cynicism.
Well, this is interesting because in the Russian space, this has been a huge subject for discussion because there's quite a few people who kind of go, "Well, this is how men are. What are you talking about?"
This is how power works.
This is how power works.
Russians so said this is how power
Russian and Russians have said this, and it's also the disconnect of the personal authority from credibility, from professional credibility. As long as you have professional credibility, it doesn't matter if you're a quirky person. And so I kind of had to speak up and point out that there's a certain similarity between not being able to respect rights of other people and respect rights of other countries. And if you can't respect people around you, then you kind of have this imperial mindset. So you kind of sound like an imperial,
It's
so
connected. It's
it is.
connected, and the abusive, manipulative characters that hang around in these spaces that we're discussing here, those that seek to sort of impose their will on others, manipulate others, hurt others for their own psychological or even sexual pleasures. Often that comes from a deep sort of brokenness in their own character, deep senses of physical or psychological inadequacy.
But the difference is that you have a prime minister that might be collapsing there any day because of too close a connection, and we have the opposite.
Yeah, but ironically, Keir Starmer doesn't appear in the Epstein files. Keir Starmer made a mistake by appointing Mandelson, quite possibly because of his connections were known to Trump, and that was a way to manipulate. So again, I think this is almost like an inverse corruption here. Trump's corruption and our choice not to resist it, but to try to appease it in some way, that taint has come through to our system as well. What I find disturbing and fascinating is when institutions allow these people to get to the top, and that those sort of personality flaws, that deeply tainted and destructive characteristics, they sometimes can bring perceived benefits to an institution, as you say. Someone like Epstein perceived as rich, as powerful, as connected, etc. For a while, maybe they bring some perceived benefits to institutions, but eventually, I think that taint starts to percolate everything. But also, these people, as you know, in the Russian system, they don't appoint people with probity. They don't, they don't sit atop of that pile and think that they're the only sort of, one that stinks there. They tend to try to percolate through these structures with people like themselves. They tend to then corrupt those systems to appoint people who are either going to tolerate that. One thinks really of people like Lindsey Graham and the little kind of worm-like creatures that dote on Trump. Come to that in a minute. But also they tend to also appoint people with the same kind of abusive, corrupt and venal characteristics as themselves. One only thinks they're really of how they all seem to gravitate to this character, Andrew Tate, and the disturbing way in which Nigel Farage also has been gleefully appearing with him. And again, this is someone who is alleged to be and be convicted of extraordinary crimes and alleged to have committed many others. You just have to watch his videos where he talks about women and actually, men who aren't abusers to know that this is a deeply poisonous and unpleasant individual.
And those are the challenges that we have in different the different culture when they collide, and all of a sudden it's an international scandal, and every place deals with it differently. I kind of think back to Panama Papers when we found out a whole bunch of stuff about different people, but consequences were all different for everybody.
Isn't that the kindergarten? That was the kindergarten of leaks now, wasn't it? Now the stuff we're getting to the real inner sanctum kind of stuff. And it's
Did
also
you
kind
have a
of
chance to see what was in the Guardian? This the assessment with the big story about the causes of war and all that kind of stuff. And
no, not yet. Although I've reached out to, I've been in correspondence with the guy who wrote that. Very keen to have him on the channel. It's one of those where someone's incredibly busy and you sort of agree half a dozen times. That's Sean Walker, who's, for many decades actually been one of the, one of the senior, let's say, Russia watchers in the British media. But hopefully now he's got this fantastic article. That would be a good catalyst to get him on the channel.
I will summarize because I watched Michael Weiss appearance on, I think, London radio or something. And his takeaway was that everybody misjudged. The West misjudged the quality and their ability of the Russian army. And Ukrainians misjudged Putin's insanity because they figured he would never attack because it would be what it is now. And it's one way to, I guess, summarize it. So I'd be curious to hear what our viewers have to say. Write in comments, participate.
Absolutely. I mean, there's some good reporting coming out at the moment. I don't know what kind of reach it has in terms of the public, but there's lots of good stuff coming out about sort of Russia's propagandistic narratives. There's a lot of good stuff coming out about the underpreparedness of Europe for Russian hybrid warfare, and it's in the midst of all these kind of breaking scandals as well. There was the rumor, I think it was Romano or one of these guys the other day said that actually there is a new rumor that it's not just half of the Epstein files that haven't been released, but what we're looking at could be as little as 1% of what's actually out there, because there are several archives which haven't really formed the basis of discussion or even of the current release process yet. So it could get very dark, and this is going to trundle on, I think, for some time.
And to return to the beginning of our conversation about Andrew, the part of the Epstein investigation that we really don't know almost nothing about is all the financial records that Scott Bessent is sitting on. Because when those pieces of information start to come out, we really start to see where the money was going. And it was interesting. I glanced through and did some analysis with artificial intelligence of Lex Wexner's deposition that he gave a couple of days ago, because he's basically the guy who seems like was the main subsidiary, he was subsidizing Epstein.
Yes, that's an interesting connection.
And then he is now trying to show himself as an honest man who was fooled and totally he was had, and now this Epstein is dead to him. Well, he is dead anyway. But it's everybody's trying to
raises the question. Rich people, as I've discovered doing my channel, rich people don't just hand bundles of cash to you for no reason whatsoever. If that was the case, then maybe we'd have teams of people working for us, even though our cause is good. No, rich people hand bundles of money over often when they see something that will increase their net worth, or which will feed their let's say dark and insatiable desires. So let's wait and see what comes out about that guy. Is there any news on his Russia connections? Because surely there must be some.
Right now, the most interesting thing that I see is that there's quite a bit of connection between Epstein and KGB and FSB and all that stuff. He was basically influence peddler, so he was this was exactly the kind of person that was in their wheelhouse. But it was more interesting to me that I haven't seen any documents that would specifically tie Epstein to like Mossad or any other things, and I'm sorry, any other intelligence agencies, although we presume that he probably was working with all of them. And there's also Ghislaine Maxwell that was clearly connected. But I was looking for documents that would specifically highlight something, and there was interestingly on Rashkin Report that we have a regular guest, Ala Kaddish, who is a journalist in Canada, and she, going through those, found an email where there's a conversation between This is a confidential human source, so CHS, that reports that there was a conversation between Alan Dershowitz and Epstein on some issues, and then after that, Dershowitz debriefed supposedly Mossad after that. So we're like starting to find some kind of like a secondhand connections, but that's kind of what's I guess I'm curious because right now the only thing that we see established is his connections to Russians.
Yeah, I mean, there's
And
some hints at was it Ehud Barak? There's some sort of meetings there and videos and whatnot. But is this, I'm going to be cynical here and say that maybe Mossad are rather more professional at hiding their connections than the KGB or the GRU? Maybe that's just a presumption there.
not the worst one. We can presume the best or hope for the best. But I think that we're seeing more and more that this is just somebody who was looking at women and children as part of the menu of what he was dealing with, and to what extent our president was informed about
Yeah.
so much of this. And now he is basically, any chance this comes up, he says, I'm totally exonerated, tries to change the subject. And so I think that war with Iran is almost upon us
Yes.
because of what we've just been spending our time discussing.
Largest armada in history, or since the Second World War, is now gathering for what looks very likely. Now we'll come to that in a minute because I think that's an interesting angle. But let's continue on the intelligence services bit, because let's be sort of slightly cynical here and say that actually the FBI or the CIA or whoever it is who does this sort of stuff, they have big budgets, they have big networks. It seems inconceivable to me that they would not have had some awareness, at least, or suspicions that something on this scale is going on, some knowledge of it. It seems fantastical given how many people are implicated, how much travel is going on, how loose they've been with their communications, that there isn't some sort of, inkling or information of this. I mean, British intelligence doesn't seem to feature at all. So if we're talking about sort of client or buyers of this compromat product, which one suspects that Epstein was selling, then,
Jonathan,
then it seems the British are not quite there.
I think what this is making me think is that we're kind of focusing our thoughts about this Russian operation on Trump or Epstein, but what we see is that there was somebody who created a lot of content and shared content with Russians, and now we see the scandal. But it's entirely possible that Russians still have all the folders of information for everybody. There's
Yeah.
got to be a library,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Trump's folder is just one of them. And the catch there is with that, with Trump, is that he doesn't, well, how do I say, he has no shame. So I think that seems to be one of his defense mechanism, and that means that what he is lured instead with is all the trillions of dollars and all that conversation. Because I
Yeah.
think trying to shame him or trying to find compromise against him, I think we're just past that.
I think we're well past that, and actually, it raises a bigger question here, because if he was a fully independent player, if he was making decisions on his own account and not to the benefit of Russia, then they could certainly use these materials to as a form of leverage over him. But if he's an out and out asset of Russia, dismantling the United States and the Western order in favor of Russian interests, they're not going to burn their own agent. They're not going to use that material. It actually, compromat becomes the least important thing here. They might use it to take down the entire US system if they thought they could do that with this material, but that's a kind of end game ploy. Why would they burn perhaps the most useful asset they have ever had, that is dismantling the Western order and destroying a superpower from the inside out?
Well, I think he burns himself all the time. They hardly need to help. And they're probably trying to prevent him from turning himself in all the time, and just admitting his motives. And I mean, he is now it's just open source of information, all the trillions of dollars that he's looking at making, and the portrait of Putin that hangs by the front entrance on the inside of Trump residence. I mean, I think those things are just so obvious that if we continue to ignore them, it's to our own peril. This is like Lex Wexner saying that maybe Epstein was a schizophrenic. Maybe you just weren't paying attention to certain signs, and that's why you're like, oh, he's crazy. No, he's pretty consistent. I think if Trump was crazy, he would put 10% tariffs on Russia. That'd be crazy. Or he would put National Guard or ICE in like big cities run by Republicans, or well, there's hardly any. But I mean, there's a very there's a
Well, there's a clear purpose to
there's a clear purpose.
There's
to
a
these
clear
things.
purpose there,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so I think that in this situation, we're just. I think it would be almost a comedy of a Mel Brooks proportions to be like a story of Trump's handler, because it's got to be the most stressful job, because he just disperses
Does
the
he have a
information.
handler anymore? I don't know. That was Mark Milley, or someone in the first administration. Does he have one? I don't think he has one anymore.
I somehow I feel like there should be one, but I'm just speculating. We should talk to people. But there has to be somebody who either relays the information or conveys the information, and has to be in touch. And just going, oh my God, what is he doing now? And
I mean, there's these comments up here which I have to address. I don't know, because he
go
keeps
ahead.
posting these. He clearly wants some kind of answer or to be provocative. I don't know. Keeps posting, what about Bondi? Is she appalling, or is she trapped and abused? It's like, come on, anyone who is working with this regime to cover up the truth, to heap further pain on abusers, has shredded any credibility they may once have had. Caroline Levitt and Pam Bondi are quite literally evil in what they're doing, in creating cover for this regime. I think it's black and white, and I think when it all comes out, I hope no one ever hires them again. I hope they are utterly destroyed and besmirched by their involvement in running cover for this scale of evil. Simply as that.
But at the same time, we see that somebody like Kristi Noem, who is just part of the crew of evil, is now looking at possibly running for Senate, and that back in her South Dakota. And that makes their current Republican senator quite nervous. But that's another way that this kind of influence can spread, and these people can have some form of longevity. But I think that Pam Bondi has just made a meme out of herself, or meme out of herself, because that 50,000 points remark at the hearing a few days ago has just become her like staple, because people just go, oh, Pam Bondi, oh, 50,000 points. And people just kind of
that's the
laugh.
response to anything you want to deflect.
But it's, again, this is administration.
It's a form of evil.
This is administration by the dollar, for the dollar, about the dollar. And so if you're unhappy with us, it just means you're unhappy with our dollars. So dollars are great. So you're lying.
and this level at which, and it'd be interesting to see where that transitions, that some level at which your acquisition of dollars seem to place you above the law, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to come to this in a couple of discussions over the next couple of weeks. I've got David Satcher coming on next week, and I think that's a perfect person to talk about the morality of this. The J.D. Vances and all of these, and Rubio in Europe, which I found his speech disingenuous. I found his behavior disingenuous. It was quite as repulsive as J.D. Vance last year, even though he wrapped it in language which was less offensive. The actual message is just as offensive. And come from someone who so blatantly has jettisoned anything they once believed and said. They bang on about Western civilization and about freedom, and this idea that Europe is censored, etc. Never mind that in the global index of press freedom and censorship, the US is 58, and almost every major European country is above the US. And in fact, the Baltics and Nordics are typically in the top 10. So quite apart from that sheer grotesque manipulation there, when they talk about Western civilization, they're talking about white Christian civilization, and there's a hint that it's also male as well. I think that's the sort of underpinning or hint at there. That's not my understanding of Western civilization. The core of Western civilization from Greece and Rome, in my mind, is rule of law. Rule of law is the actual foundation from which everything else flows.
You know,
But they never mention that.
I've spoken with David Satter on my channel years ago at this point, but I still remember that what he pointed to as the biggest problem in Russia, and that is lawlessness. And now, looking at the situation now, I'd be curious to get his take on the American lawlessness and the role in that was played by Trump coming to power. And whether anybody that may have supported Donald Trump, thinking that he was going to be better than whoever we had at the time, what was his name? Oh well, doesn't matter. Was going to be better, and whether this is like kind of how does David I wonder feels about this.
Yes, and I think it'd be interesting to get the nuances of that, and also, someone who's watched Russia for decades, and now it is quite literally burning up its resources, burning up its people, burning up its future, and yet it is still absolutely wedded to not just the imperial concept, because imperialism here, people think of it as a fairly abstract, dry concept. But as we go back to what you said earlier, you take it back to individual human values. It is about the domination and subjugation of other individuals. It's about depriving them of identity, rights, and when you get to the pointy end on the ground, it is about the physical beating, killing, and raping and theft. That seems to be something that Russia is addicted to the point of self-destruction. So I think it'd be interesting to sort of talk about
I
that.
think the reason for that is quite simple, which is their total inability to improve life inside the country. And I think that's just what we see consistently over and over is when a government fails to improve life of its citizens and residents, it looks at outside agitators, so to say, the outside problems. And we even see the same thing with Iran and the United States. So I think the concept is fundamentally the same. Can you make life of your people better? No. So you're going to lose power? You can't lose power. So you got to start a war. And
That's the war. Here we are. Yeah. Let's turn in the last few minutes to something else, which I'm going to put out an episode, I think, probably tomorrow, where I intended to do this one early last year, asking the question, is Trump a tyrant? But things moved so quickly, I never got to publish the episode. And, the evidence of his incipient tyranny just kind of accelerated past the point of needing to pose that question. I'm now going to put an episode out saying Trump is now a tyrant, because what it seems today is that he has been, as you'd expect, creating some unhinged comments about the courts pushing back on his tariffs, his illegal tariffs. And he is declaring that somehow the Supreme Court is being influenced and controlled by outside forces, foreign agents. Well, we've heard this story before. This is a familiar song of tyrants around the world.
Yes.
I didn't get a chance to drink
I
your coffee
did.
there.
I
I should
saw
have
like,
carried
oh,
on talking.
okay, wait a minute. No, that sentence said it.
Georgia
Okay.
Dream, Orban. This is the standard recourse, isn't it?
They're just going to do what they're going to do.
You lost for
sometimes
words on that one. You're
I'm lost for.
words.
I'm going to have a drink of.
Yeah.
I think we're surrounded by people who have a lot of power, who don't know what to do with that power, who feel like the power that they have gives them agency that nobody else has. And then we have to clean that mess up when they all mess up and go away. And because we saw this in the The recession 2008, when some things were too big to fail, and so some people, a lot of people, lost everything, and some people managed to come out of it just fine and come out of it better, and somehow a lot of them were connected, had government positions, and this is where we see that our country is starting to shift and divide, not left and right, but up and down. And we
Yeah,
see that this is the separation of our government and our country that I think people start to realize that that's what's happening. And the Epstein case, just as a reminder, every day, every hour, the same as Trump's board of peace, you just see again and again that elites have one life and the rest of us have another. And if Trump is going to talk about foreign influences, well, we know with him, every accusation is an admission. So I would be worried, but, well, Pam Bondi, Cash Patel, I mean, we should all be very worried.
absolutely. And it seems as well to me, the big question is, why do so many of these rich people, I mean, maybe it's a self-answering question, why do so many of them have an antipathy to democracy? Why do so many of them actually subscribe to philosophies that suggest that democracy is broken, that it needs to be swept away? We can see, obviously, in personal interest, they want to sweep away anything that limits their puts limitations on their earning power, on anything that taxes them in a fair way for the majority, anything that puts limitations or frameworks around how their businesses operate. I think that's fairly obvious. But they seem to ideologically hook onto ideas that are, by their nature, some are techno fascist, some are simply fascist, but many of them seem drawn to I would say, anti-democratic philosophies.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it, interestingly, has come out of this so called libertarian Silicon Valley that was supposed to be all for freedom, but now it turned out that they're really more for monopoly. This is very interesting to see that Meta is now going to be spending $65 million this election cycle to elect politicians who are going to be supportive of artificial intelligence, because that's who runs the show. So, we see these corporations that are getting more and more involved because that's how you survive. And so, it was kind of, we had a separation of politics and business to some extent, but now we see that politics is trying to take over like every sphere of culture, money, religion, everything. And this is why white Christian nationalism has become such a problem, and why it's so interesting to watch somebody like James Tallarico, who's a state representative in Texas, who is running for Senate, who basically was forbidden from appearing on television because he clearly is a threat to the powers that be, because it just doesn't make much sense. He is like the sweetest man alive. And it talks about like Christian love and how basically it's all about love your neighbor, and that's it's not about all this other stuff. It's about love your neighbor. Like clearly, this guy is a threat. So when we see like cruelty as the one side's option, and we see like a kindness as the other, I guess there's a question of what's going to fix the problem. And that's not where American politics is. We just see we give these guys a chance. When they fuck it up, then we give the other guys a chance. When they fuck it up, we give it to the other guys. And that's all we got. And so I think the lesson, because we're approaching on 12th anniversary of Crimea annexation and all of that, this is, it's 12 years ago. To me, it just highlights to what extent the West is inconsistent and cannot be relied on. And to all the people that demand that America be world policeman, shut the hell up. Like,
And this is one of the reasons they want to destroy the European community, as it was called, or the EU, because it is still trying to put in place some kind of framework, some kind of barriers to the absolute domination of AI, to the cannibalization of its economy, to its workforces, etc. And I think a lot of the geopolitical moves we're seeing are literally on behalf of the tech bros to try to break down any national, international structures that put barriers in their way. I'm not a Marxist, but it seems to me that if our civilization is going to survive, we need a very rigorous anti-monopolistic practices, and at some point, AI might need to be nationalized, controlled by governments that are accountable to the people, Otherwise, I see an almost inevitable trajectory of AI-driven control of all the means of production and wealth, and that's not going to play. That's not going to work too well for the average person.
So, are you seeing it AI as a public utility?
I think at some point it may have to be simply for the preservation of humanity. Because if you listen to Sam Altman, no, I'll kind of end on this one. If you listen to Sam Altman and others, they say that they believe there's a 1 in 8, 1 in 10, 1 in 5, or whatever it is chance that AI is going to end humanity. But that's a bet they're willing to take. Well, I'm
But if
sorry,
we're gonna,
no one elects them to make that choice.
but if we're gonna keep voting for Trump, can you blame AI?
Yeah, well, this is it. If AI is looking at this going like, oh, geez, right. I mean, the best we can hope for here is that the AI grows up very quickly and just says to us, no. Back where we started, it says finally no to the humans who've not had no said to them for decades, and it takes their toys away and puts us all in a little zoo. That's the best scenario I think we can hope for.
Yes, a little AI psychosis. Jonathan, thank you
On
so
that, my lasagna I can hear the microwave going ping, not the microwave. I can hear the oven going ping there. My
much.
lasagna is ready. Time is up.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've enjoyed this time before Jonathan's Lasagna with Yuri Rashkin and Jonathan Fink. Thank you so much for being there. Support Ukraine. Support. You have a fundraiser, don't you, have going on right now, Jonathan?
We do. We have one which is Car for Ukraine, and BMA has been kind enough to put it there. It is up in the chat. Fantastic. That's the
Yes,
comment
just
there.
trying to find the comment because is that the comment? Okay.
I think that was it. Yeah, that was
There you
probably the one. Oh, well, there's that. That's mine. That's my personal one. But somewhere is the fundraiser for trucks that we're doing as well. I'll make sure that link is in the description. It's not got far to go, actually. It's just got 1.5K to round out that Christmas trucks fundraiser. And then we'll start a new one. We're starting a new one for drones with Jiggers Paw and Cartier vampire drones. So we're not mincing about here. This isn't humanitarian stuff. This is deleting Russians who are where they shouldn't be. That's our next fundraiser.
Go, Jonathan. Thanks, you. Thanks, everyone. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Yes.